A report released from the CDC earlier this week has some troubling news about the birth rate in the United States. As one analyst noted, the U.S. birth rate has hit its lowest level. The U.S. also is below the replacement fertility level. 25 states had more deaths than births in 2020. Joining us now is Brad Wilcox, fellow at the Institute for Family Studies and director of the National Marriage Project. Brad, thanks so much for speaking with us today. We really appreciate it. Let's talk a little bit more about this report. This is the sixth consecutive year that the U.S. birth rate has declined. What do you think is the driving force, and is it cause for concern?
Obviously, one of the factors in 2020 is COVID, which spiked births down in December. But this is obviously a part of a longer running pattern, as your comments just indicated. We're seeing just kind of fertility falling in the U.S. and in many countries. And it's definitely cause for concern for the future of our economy. I think more importantly, for the future of our families here in America.
And where do we see the largest decline in birth rates? Which age group?
We see the largest declines among teens and 20-somethings. And typically, kind of historically, we'd be having a lot of our kids among 20-something Americans, but that's just not happening today the way that it was 20, 30, 40 years ago.
And Brad, which age group can we know is having the highest birth rate, and is that something maybe to celebrate?
Well, it's still the case that that women in their 20s and early 30s are having more kids. It's just they're having many fewer kids than was the case, 30 or 40 years ago. A lot of young women are postponing getting married. They're postponing having kids. And so, when this is sort of happening in large numbers, it's driving our fertility rate in the U.S. down. And what that means, of course, is that we're going to have smaller families, and we're going to have fewer families with kids, and more adults who end up, never having children. And I think as they hit midlife and later life, there's going to be a lot of what we call kind of, bare branches, where people just don't have the social ties and the emotional support that they need to get by in life or to thrive in life.
Yeah, and also in addition to the decline in birth rates overall last year, 25 states actually had more deaths than births. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the impact that will have?
As we kind of look at press reports on this, as you know, we're seeing that, many states across the U.S. are seeing more people die than babies born. That's just kind of a sign of demographic decline. We've been kind of seeing this in many places, in East Asia and Japan, for instance, in Southern Europe and Italy, for instance. And I think it gives people oftentimes, a sense of despair not to see their schools filled with children, not to see their streets teeming with families. So, that can engender, just a lack of hope and a concern for the future, that's obviously merited.
Yeah, and I also noted that in a tweet you wrote that the United States is now below Japan's fertility rate in 1988. Why is that so noteworthy?
Yeah, so Japan, I think, is really one of the countries here that gives us tremendous cause for concern. What we're seeing in Japan is the country is literally shrinking by hundreds of thousands of people now every year. And because they're having many more people die in Japan than babies born. And starting really in the 1980s and beyond there, we see just a dramatic decline in fertility. Where for a variety of reasons, young Japanese adults were not getting married and not having kids. And so the concern here is that the United States might follow down the path that's already been pioneered in countries like Japan. And that path is a path of economic stagnation. It's a path of, way too few families. And it's a path, too, of tremendous loneliness. There was just really a harrowing story that was told recently about, millions of older Japanese people just living alone, dying alone, not even being discovered oftentimes when they had died for often weeks on end. And it's just because there are not enough kids. There are not enough family members now for so many people in Japan. So that's, of course, the big cause for concern here is that we might be in the U.S. heading down a path where dramatic declines in marriage and fertility end up meaning that too many Americans don't end up having families.
And Brad, before I let you go, really quickly, we don't have a lot of time left, but what do you think can be done to reverse this so-called baby bust trend?
Well, I think one good idea is passing a child allowance like Senator Romney has proposed. Another good idea would be to address sort of the weaknesses in our educational system that make so many of our young adults not prepared for today's labor market, like improving vocational education. But most fundamentally, I think we have to sort of change the culture. Too many Americans today, according to Pew data, falsely believe that their jobs are more likely to make them fulfilled and make them happy. But we know from the data that strong marriages, strong families are actually much more likely to deliver for Americans when it comes to giving them a sense of meaning, purpose, direction, and also happiness.
Absolutely, Brad. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Brad Wilcox, Fellow at the Institute for Family Studies. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me on today.